You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos Stilianessis.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Here for the Truth, episode 34. And we're here with Joel Brown today, an incredible dude who's sharing some pretty impactful truths on social media at the moment. A little bit about Joel. Joel Brown is a master coach, speaker, and founder of the #1 motivation website, addictedtosuccess.com, which has achieved over 332 million views worldwide over the last 12 years. Joel is featured in the new hit movie, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and the We Rise Up movie with Richard Branson. He's studied theology, human behavior for the last decade. Joel is the host of the Addicted to Success podcast that's achieved more than 5 million downloads, featuring thought leaders such as Matthew McConaughey, Tony Robbins, Gary Vaynerchuk, and many more. Joel, firstly, man, congratulations on that first name. It's a pretty special name to have.
It's a pretty dope name, man.
Yeah, I often try to explain to Yerasimos what it's like being a Joel, but he just doesn't get it. So I'm wondering if you can break that down for us.
Well, it's interesting because I think I've only come across maybe one or two other Joels in my life. It's from the book in the Bible, Joel. He was a minor prophet. Yeah. And it was probably one of the most boring books in the Bible. Because some people when I meet my Christian friends, they're like, hey, you read the book, Joel? I'm like, yeah, and I was bored when I read it. But it was interesting because it wasn't meant to be a big book. It was just like a warning. It was a prophecy that he had shared in that time. And I dug deeper into it and looked at it all. And I'm like, it's interesting how we give meaning to names, right? Mm-hmm. And certain words we use, we make it mean something. And I think I've never really felt like, some people don't like their name. Like for me, I've just embraced it, going, yeah, cool. It feels like it's a rare name. I don't know about you, man. Have you come across?
I'm with you, man. I love my name. I feel really connected to my name. We're special people, bro.
Yeah, I've known a lot of Joels in the US. I mean, not like 100 of them, but definitely a good handful. Yeah. But I'm so curious, around names, what isn't in the name? Is there some kind of frequency in a name that, especially if it comes from somewhere, do you live that out? I'm named after Ios Yerasimos, which is Saint Yerasimos, which is the patron saint of the island of Kefalonia, where my father was born and raised on. And he was the healer and protector of the island. So it's when I kind of realized that, I kind of took more ownership of that name, of that Greek name. I used to go by shortened Americanized version of that for most of my life. So I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
There you go. Well, I guess it depends, right? If people struggle pronouncing your name, if it's a bit longer, you tend to shorten it for time's sake, and to create clarity in those short moments. But it's interesting because, my girlfriend, we're having a conversation. We're like, if we were to ever get to the point where we had a child, what would you call your girl? What would you call a boy? Right. And so we had this kind of conversation, hypotheticals, and she's Spanish. So certain names in Spanish to me in Australia, in English, sounds terrible. I'm just like, what? Why would you call a kid that name? It just doesn't sound right. And she's doing the same. I think, I picked a really beautiful name. And I say it, and she's like, nah, because in Spanish it means this. So it's funny how we all have our own different associations and interpretations. But, certain names I hear some people say sometimes, I'm like, oh, a Michael. And my mind goes to all the Michaels I've ever known. And did I have a good or bad experience with a Michael? And then you kind of categorize them and put them in buckets, right? And for any Michael that's listening, I haven't had any bad experiences, by the way. But it's just example, that's what we do, right? We like to put things in boxes. We like to put labels on it because it makes us feel safe, because it makes us feel like we've worked that person out, or we know that type. Yeah, we do it in pretty much everything in life, right?
Yeah, man. It's the primordial fear of the unknown, right? And if we don't know, often we pretend that we know. We pretend to be certain, right? Because there's a lot to unpack just in that simple conversation there. For sure.
Little do we know that there's a lot of the what we don't know that we don't know in the space as well.
Yeah.
So it'll be open to that. That's for sure.
Definitely, man.
Joel, and by Joel I mean you, Joel, not here for the truth, Joel. What I guess want to start off, man, and getting into your personal hero's journey a little bit. Like, what were some of your major rites of passage that got you from growing up in Perth to being a master coach and then speaking out on what's going on in the world today as we witness this I'd like to say totalitarian tiptoe, but it's more of a fucking large gate cycle
Picking
towards
up,
totalitarianism. You know what I'm saying?
picking up. Yeah, good and evil are rising at the same time. It's getting interesting, isn't it? Well, yeah, like I'll take my mind back to a time where I wasn't even into looking into what all this stuff is. Probably pretty naive to the fact that the world has evil entities and operates off empire. Uh, it was probably about 15 years back. I was working in a 9 to 5 job. Actually, before that, I was actually working in the music industry. So I was working with artists like Usher, Pharrell, Kelly Rowland, Ludacris, Flow Rider. I was producer, manager, right? So I was managing producers, managing songwriters. I was in the music business at 20 years old. And I had all the red carpets and I had the stardom and hanging out with the superstars and everything else. And I got to a point where I started to feel like this isn't it. And no one around me could understand it. I was managing my best friend at the time, one of my other buddies too. And I just got to the point where I said to him, like, I'm not coming back to America, because I came back to Australia. This is a few years in. And they're like, what do you mean? We're like literally just taking off. They started working with A$AP Rocky. They were going to be working with Kanye West, like all these big, and I'm like, it's just not here. And they just couldn't understand it. And they're trying to get me to articulate. I'm like, I can't. It's just, there's this knot in my stomach and this repeating line in my head that you're not supposed to be here and it's time to move on. I call it the whispers of wisdom, right? It's like God was like tapping me on the shoulder going, let's move now, like do your thing. Cause I was in the background a lot, managing everything from the background. And there was this nudge to like step in and go bigger. So I honored that. And I moved back to Perth, Western Australia, which is where I'm born and raised. I worked in a 9 to 5 job. I got really good at sales. And in that meantime, I did a lot of self-development. I was working on a lot of my own layers, working through the healing, working through the strategy, understanding the mindset. I flew out to the UK to work with Richard Bandler, who's a co-founder of NLP. I worked with him in London for a while, going deep into that. I came back and worked with Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street. So not the original, not Leonardo DiCaprio, but the original, Wolf of Wall Street. And he challenged me to cast a 10-year vision. And this is when everything started to become more and more real, because I actually got to ink out the things that I now get to consider to be able to craft the life that I truly desire to create. Because before it was always about everybody else, managing songwriters, managing producers, hustling in the business, being cornered into deals or being blackballed from certain deals if we weren't taking certain, it was nuts. Like the type of thing, the politics in the music industry that I was experiencing at a young age. But it made me stronger and made me understand that this world is like a battlefield. You got to strategize. You got to, get in and you got to be strategic about how you play your moves. And it's about how you develop your mindset and your emotional fitness as well. So I took all that. And then I realized within the 10-year vision that I wasn't able to implement the 10-year vision at the pace that I wanted to, because I challenged myself. I casted 10 years. I went, what would it look like for me to do this in 3? And so it meant that I needed to bite the bullet and do one big swing. And that big swing that I committed to was to work in the deserts of Western Australia, in the northwest of Australia. I dropped out of high school. I don't know if you guys know that, but I dropped out of high school. And so I didn't have any trade skills, but the only way that I could work in the deserts of northwestern Australia to get paid 120, 130 grand a year for good coin was for me to get a snake handling certificate. So I know it sounds kind of crazy. Some people listening like, what the hell? This is like some Steve Irwin type stuff. But yeah, I went and learned how to, handle snakes and reptiles and learn how to work with the fauna, the animals. And I worked my way into the environmental team, and I started learning all these other skill sets, how to drive heavy machinery and and trades assistant skills. And I just worked my way through it. And I committed to that for 9 months straight. And I tell you, you're talking about, like we'll see each other in the prison camp or whatever it is if we don't take the shot, right? Well, it felt like that. I was doing 28 days straight with 4 days off, working 12-hour shifts. And mind you, on top of that, when I go back to my chalet, my room at the end of the 12-hour day, I would sit there and I'd work on Addicted to Success. And I'd pump out like 3 or 4 articles a day because I could just see the vision. I was so committed to it. And so here we are, 12 years down the line after launching Addicted to Success, getting a lot of attention from people like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Oprah, Diddy. I had a lot of celebrities sharing my stuff, which helped it to build traffic very quickly. I saw that there wasn't much online at the time. It's this thing where you're looking for something and it's like, how come nobody's created a solution for this? Mm-hmm. So I decided to be the solution. I was like, well, there was hardly any self-development websites online at the time. There were some spiritual based things, and there was also like psychology sites, but a lot of that was like reading a medical research paper. People couldn't connect with it. So I would go and interview people that have crushed it, and then we would like dissect their strategy and a game plan and then share it with my followers. And people loved that because I essentially did all the hard work and the trench work for them. And on top of it, I would go and learn very complex things around psychology, human behavior, theology, philosophy, and I would narrow it down into a simplified model for people to be able to follow step by step. And it worked. It blew up. There's a formula to it. People want hope. They want to know that their life can improve and get better. And we built the whole brand off that. And I operate with my personal brand more so now because Addicted to Success has its own legs. So I got my team that runs it, and it's got a reputation. We've been around for 12 years. It's got the credibility, and it works, But the entrepreneurial journey it hasn't been a straight path. We've had the ups and downs, but it's been good, man. It's been good.
Incredible, man.
I tried to nutshell it. I know I gave you guys like 15, 16 years of like the journey, dude, but
great.
That's the nutshell. Yeah.
That was perfect, man. I mean, the path is made by working. We're walking, and we learn as we go, and we figure things out on our own, and we figure out what works. And I think so often people, like we are always outsourcing how things are going to work for us, what a successful path looks like. But at the same time, for me personally, in my experience, I feel like it's a really individualistic thing, depending on, our circumstances, how we are, our own, I guess psychology and emotional responses and behaviors, how we're raised. And just personally, in my experience, I found that I've started seeing more success, whatever I've had, when I started being more myself. To be honest with you, like stepping more deeper into authenticity and who I am. What do you think about that?
Well, my question for you is, how do you do that, right? Like, how does that become apparent, and when does a penny drop? Because I know a lot of people can hear it, and I know I heard it too. I kept hearing you, just be more of yourself.
Yeah.
And I feel like I am now. I've embraced it. But it was part of an evolution, right? Like, how does that come in? What's your experience? I want to know from you too.
Yeah, definitely, man. I mean, it's in my experience, it's always the inner work first. And it's recognizing those inner barriers that I've built, which prevent me from being myself. So you catch yourself in moments where, you know what you want to say, you know what you want to respond, you know what you want to share. But for some reason, there's resistance and there's fear there. And that fear is often a result of, I guess, trauma, conditioning, guilt, shame, judgment, whatever it is. And my process has been in noticing that resistance, then doing the release work that's necessary and diving in, asking myself the question. And I say this pretty much every episode, but as above, so below, as within, so without. The deeper I go within, it seems as though the further I'm able to extend outwards in this reality that we're experiencing. So the process for me in understanding how to be myself is realizing what's preventing me from being myself, and it's doing that work necessary.
Yeah. I love that, man. I love it. Peeling back the layers.
Yeah.
I think society and our caregivers, they're doing the best. Well, our caregivers tend to be doing the best they can with what they have, but it's not always going to be conducive for the growth that we want, right? And society doesn't give a shit. Like, they're just doing their thing. So it tends to be like this. I look at it as like God originally designed us in a certain way, and it's like, here we are, we're the package, we're there, we're ready to rock and roll. And then we get like, it's like transparent, you know, if you've ever seen those old school projectors where you'd have like a transparent sheet and it'd be like drawn or written on it and you project it up onto the wall. Like I'm sounding like I'm mad old right now, but I remember it when I was in high school, you know, early high school days. But I look at it like you've got like God's original design as this template and it's dope. And then next thing it's like you learn something from mom and dad that doesn't quite fit. And it like kind of, you take it on as, oh, that means that I'm not good enough. Okay, we'll go with that. That's just how it is. Next one. Oh, that means that I'm not loved. This one here means failure and mistakes are bad, right? And then society says you gotta pay your taxes and you gotta do this and you gotta act this way and this is pretty and this is ugly and this is what's cool. And we just keep getting scribble after scribble after scribble on top of these transparent sheets that continue to layer on top of us to the point where we don't know ourselves anymore.
Yeah.
The question is, do we ever really truly know ourselves? Maybe not. It's like when I do the transformational work, the healing, the trauma, the wound work, the shadow work, the inner child blueprint, the unconscious patterns. When we work through that with my clients, it gets to a point they're like, oh my gosh, they feel like a new human being. And I said to them, you're just coming back to who you really were before all the scribbles, you know? And I think this is the big defining thing that determines whether you're going to do that or not. A successful captain can only make the journey to the end with flow when he knows his ship, right? Yeah. And what I mean by that is like, you've got to know the intricacies. You've got to work through it and be familiar with it. And this is where I look at it as ownership. Like we've got to own a ship, right? In order to have a successful journey. And so most people don't make it their business to audit themselves. They don't make it their business to actually get to know who they really are. Like I'm okay with my weaknesses. I don't make that a reinforcement of feeling not good enough. I look at it as if I want to feel good enough, I get to look at the weaknesses and I get to pair with them and get in and face off with it and go, I know you've been here for a while, but we're not going to do this anymore. Yeah. So it's the relationship with self. People are very scared to have that relationship with themselves, because they don't feel worthy of having a powerful relationship with themselves, you know? And it's interesting because I see it masked a lot in the self-development space. I don't know if you guys notice, but like, it's kind of like the spiritual leader that's like the guru, but then they become so ego driven and they're masking it with like, I'm egoless, but it's like, no, that in itself is ego, right? And so some people are trying to put on this, like, I love, you know, it's self. It's self-love so much to the point where then you come out of it and it's an overcompensation. So my focus with my clients, and even this might be my journey myself, is like coming back to that center. How do we come somewhere in the middle? And I don't think we're ever fully in the middle. I think we like to think that we are, and we may have brief moments of feeling that. The goal is to recalibrate and come back in. And I think the more you practice ownership, the better you become at recalibrating over and over again until it just becomes natural to know where that center point is.
Yeah, man. Yeah, brother. We visit the middle from time to time to check, and then where we're going on that journey. It's the lemniscate, which is the infinity symbol, and like this ancient symbology tells us a lot. This is actually our primordial nature that we're constantly moving through. You know, the infinity symbol. But so we visit the middle. We check ourselves. We calibrate briefly, then we continue on the journey. It's brief visitations, man. That's all it is.
Yeah, you don't want to be sitting in that trying to recalibrate for too long, though. Too. Some people sit near the middle and just stay there, like, and then it's funny, man. Life is funny. It's a dance. It seriously is a dance. I don't think I ever want to be fully there. It's like the question is, where's there?
Yeah, where's there exactly? Yeah.
I ask people this when they're like, I'm not there. I'm like, well, where's there? Like, let's define it. And does it make sense, or is it an overcompensation, or are you coming from lack? Yeah, and this is the state of the world right now. We're in the lower brackets, and you see what's happening with this fear and this propaganda that's being pumped. They're trying to drive us down into shame and guilt. They're trying to drive us down into apathy. They're trying to drive us down into fear, hate, blame, all these areas. You're not going to take ownership in that space if you stay there. Yeah. So you're not empowered, you're disempowered, which is exactly what these upper entities, if you want to call them that, doesn't mean that they're higher than, it just means that they're established themselves and called that, and that's the frame they hold, and they want you to be in a submissive state because you're easier to be controlled there. They don't like people like us. Mm-hmm. They don't like entrepreneurial minded people that put freedom before safety when times get tough. Look at the Spartans. They put freedom before safety. It's like they weren't going to let someone just come in and roll on them. You're Greek,
Yeah,
bro, and like the Greeks, damn, they were the third empire. They conquered Medo-Persia, and Alexander the Great. What did he do? He died at like what, 23 years old or 24? Like he was young.
something like that. He was young, yeah.
Yeah, he needed to do some work with Tony Robbins or something. Like he needed to cast a new vision and get that new mountain to conquer. He felt like he already conquered it, and he drank himself to death. There was all these different theories of what happened, but we look at that and we just think like, there's a lot that can be achieved in a small amount of time. He channeled it into conquering, but in a way where it was based off the intention of needing to dominate and needing that power. But it's like we're in a world now where that's not necessary for us, but we have a sphere we get to operate in, and why not play it our best? Why not challenge ourselves to see how far we can go with this? And why not look at this as a challenge to see, all right, I'm being tested and I'm being constantly shot at to try and drag myself down to lower frequencies. How do I stay above? Our goal is to stay above the line, and we get to lead above the line. And a lot of people aren't. They're missing it. They're getting dragged so deep below the line that they don't know they're below the line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they just don't.
What do you think are the main things that make people realize they're not where they're at, like that keep them from living their best life, that keep them living this fear, shame, and guilt, and that makes them easy to be propagandized? Like, what do you think are the main things?
We, when I say we, like you and I, and if you're listening right now and you've been an entrepreneurial minded person for a while, you've implemented things, you've built your business, you've been in the practice for a while. It comes back to ownership. It absolutely does. It comes back to ownership. I'm finding, I'm not saying, I don't want to generalize, but what I am finding is there's typically a few classes of people in society. There's four classes. And it's really interesting because I want to really understand the psychology of this. Let's like kind of work this out together. Sure. You have four classes of people in society right now that are not taking the shot. Generally, the majority of them aren't. The first one are high school dropouts. That's interesting, right?
Yep.
A lot of people that didn't complete high school, have gone off, maybe done a trade or whatever they've done, they are more resistant to the shot. The second class is the entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial minded. They've learned to carve their own path, to create their own freedoms. The third one is those with a PhD, very resistant, which is interesting because they keep, like, you, from all the stuff you see on the news and the media, you'd think that those with PhDs would be the ones that are all taking it and on board because you keep hearing doctors doing it. That doesn't mean that's it. Those with the PhD have practice exploring both sides of the coin. They dig very deep into their research. They have to weigh it up and generate a case quite often in their studies. So they're doing that and they're going, this doesn't add up. I'm going to wait on this one, right? And they're taught not to be irrational. They're taught to lay it all out and square it all up. And then what we have is the fourth bracket, which is those that are more spiritually in practice. They've maybe at some point looked into alternative methods. They tend to be more anti-establishment as well. Mm-hmm. So when we see these four groups, I'm seeing this, and if we pair it all together, one is not connecting with the indoctrination. That's the high school dropout. Maybe a little bit of a criminal past, maybe a little bit of a rebellious nature. Okay, fair enough, right? The second class that I mentioned, entrepreneurs, we've learned to come outside of what society expects and create something new, and we're used to ridicule. We're used to having to keep going, whether there's failures or mistakes or whatever it is. The lessons we get to learn, we grab and hold, and we keep building from that. The PhDs, like I said, I already mentioned what they do, right? Weigh it up. And the last bracket, spiritual, if we look at those elements and we combine them all together, leadership right now, in order for us to really thrive, is going to require from us to integrate all four of those major points if you want to be an ultimate leader in this space and time, because they're all the things that oppose the establishment for good reason.
Yeah.
Right. And I see, and like some people have a little bit of it in it, but they haven't owned it. That's what I'm saying. It's like they haven't owned it. They've like been part of a system. They've been deep in relying on the medical system. Maybe a reference point or evidence is that their family members have died from what they were told is COVID. So they're like, well, crap, I've seen this person and my friend over here says that person passed. And it starts to weigh up and you go, well, maybe this thing is true. And then they start forgetting who they are and they start not trusting their God-given immune system. You know, they stop trusting their sense of knowing that they can get on top of this and make preventative measures. They start watching a little bit too much of the news and media. They start listening to people that they want to listen to because they haven't gone to do the due diligence themselves. So they're trying to get that information from someone else. This is why I keep saying to people, be sovereign. Like be in the practice of being sovereign. Like we were doing it before. That's why we don't fall for this charade.
Yeah.
And little do people know that this thing is literally on a tissue right now. Like there's not much holding it. It feels like there's a lot holding it for people that are like on the inside of the system, but it's on a freaking tissue paper. And if we just stand up and say, we ain't doing this anymore, this is BS, and we stop complying, this tissue will wet and it will fall through. Like people don't know how close we are to it. We're very close. But it's going to take a lot more of us. Like if we go to another 10% more people, 20%, it starts getting louder and they start buckling. Like the reason why there's a window and there's a lot of pressure is because they know that their time is wearing thin. There's only so much rope, and evil, because that's what it is. It's evil. Let's just call a spade a spade. It always likes to pull it right to the end of the rope before it hangs itself. Always. And it can't help it. It has to go as far as it can to the edge. It ends up hanging itself in the end of it all. Good wins, love wins, truth wins, liberty wins. Always.
Yep.
And so those that haven't practiced ownership, that's your first challenge, is to get into that ownership. The second thing is get ready for a bumpy ride. The pressure will increase. It will get bumpy. It's like turbulence before we smooth sail. You know, it's going to be like that. And you know, I know you guys have got this on your podcast, Joel. I see what you post often as well. Like we're raising the truth and we're sharing it there. We're challenging and getting people to think, right? Like let my people think. If they can just think, like critically think, not fear, but think, right? They're two different things.
Yeah.
And we can make a huge impact.
Yeah, dude. Absolutely, man. No doubt about that. I mean, part of the bumpy ride coming up is learning how to navigate now, you know what I mean? And by flexing that discernment, by starting to figure out your own shit in the current period, is going to equip you much better to continue to be a better navigator of your own ship, of your own vessel moving forward. I think what's really important also is for people to recognize what is on the flip side of this. Like the entire purpose of socialist and communist propaganda is demoralization. It is literally created to demoralize you. And I've got this quote here from Theodore Dalrymple. He says, "In my study of communist societies, I came to the conclusion that the purpose of communist propaganda was not to persuade or convince, not to inform, but to humiliate. And therefore, the less it corresponded to reality, the better. When people are forced to remain silent, when they are being told the most obvious lies, or even worse, when they are forced to repeat the lies themselves, they lose once and for all their sense of probity. To assent to obvious lies is, in some small way, to become evil oneself. One's standing to resist anything is thus eroded and even destroyed. A society of emasculated liars is easy to control. I think if you examine political correctness, it has the same effect and is intended to." So literally, it's meant to be as inverted as possible. It is designed to humiliate you. And the moment that you align yourself with this obvious lie, then you can no longer trust yourself. And if you can no longer trust yourself, what kind of navigator are you going to be? So for me, the process of positioning ourselves accordingly and learning to flow during this period is doing small things to trust yourself, you know, so then you can be the leader of your own ship and you can be the master.
Yeah, no, I feel that. That's a powerful quote. I love it. I love it. It encapsulates what's going on right now. Yeah, you know, I'm a believer in God. And one of the big things that I notice as a theme in the scriptures is there's this constant push, like where evil is trying to get those that are believers in this connection with God, trying to get these people into this doubt, right? So like this constant, like doubt yourself and doubt your creator. And I believe that lies believed breaks the circle of love and trust. The ultimate thing that we get to hold that gives us the most hope and faith is having that trust that God has got us, right? And that we're there with God in that co-creation. And like, I see what's going on right now. And if you have a look at, like, I studied Agenda 2030. I've read Klaus Schwab's book, The Great Reset. It's boring. It's a terrible book. But it's also written in a way where I can see that people that don't think of like creating a world where we have God-given principles and we live by morals and standards that would be conducive for us to be able to actually look and honor the fact that we have a creator and that we're in this incredible original design that's constantly renewing, and that we have the opportunity to actually look at life as a thing that we get to be grateful for and not have to look at government as God. Then I can see how people that take God out of the picture, how they can see this so-called utopia that they want to create with their Agenda 2030 would be a good thing.
Yeah.
But like, if we peel it back, we can't trust them. We can't. Like, when you see the things that they've said that they're going to be doing, they've relabeled evil intentions.
Yeah.
Like, when you look at this, like, like climate crisis, like it used to be called climate change. It's like, okay, climate change is changing. We've got to look after the environment. When God gave us dominion over the earth, he gave us great responsibility, but he always put us first before the actual environment, honoring the fact that we get to be growing people that make decisions, knowing when we're looking after things and being responsible or not. So we become a very irresponsible society. So I can see how they can utilize climate change, but what they do is they go and repackage it and call it climate emergency or climate crisis. Now they start putting it on death certificates. You got to start asking questions when this comes into play. It's like, what happens then? Are they going to lock the world down every whatever days because they say the climate has to take a break? And now they're like slowing down our business and impeding on us to create more control. Do they bring in a Sunday law? Every Sunday you can't work. You've got it, like, like these stuff have been talked about within the papacy, within the Vatican, and being talked about within the UN and these meetings in Davos. Like, all this stuff's been talked about. It's written. You can see this online. It's not like a conspiracy, right? Mm-hmm. So we look at this, and then you got someone like Bill Gates, who everyone knows is not even a doctor, let alone a scientist or a virologist, but he's out there dishing out advice. And you see the cruel intentions behind this guy, like giggling and laughing as he says, wait till the next wave. It's like no normal person would behave like that. That's a behavior of a psychopath. You see him putting out his book about climate crisis. So it's like, follow this now. Look at it. Where's the money going? What are they trying to push? Green deals. They're trying to move everything to this next space. We've got the vax. Okay, that's going on. We know what's in that stuff is poison. And we look at what they're moving next. Let's get everyone on the same page. If we can funnel the world into a system where they're all on the same page, because you're definitely selfish. If you disagree with climate emergency, you're a selfish son of a gun, because you should be putting the earth. How dare you? You remember how the little Greta Thunberg? How dare you?
Yeah.
And blah, blah, blah. She's like shaming. It's this. She triggers me so much. But
I hear you, bro.
You guys know, right? You guys know. And it's like, it's such a shame, because it's such an important thing that we do look after the environment. But when it starts getting bastardized and distorted and used as a manipulative tool to funnel everybody like a bunch of leads into a system, this is where it starts to get out of hand. And this is what's happening. So, we can't personally control that that's the agenda that they want, and they have a lot of money behind it, and they've pulled strings and been thinking about this probably before we were even born. But what we can control is how we show up in those moments. When this is projected onto us, do we stand ground and say, I see what's going on here, and this is what I stand for? We've got to have our principles, and people are now being tested, and it's happening. I'm seeing it. People are realizing they didn't set their standards. They don't have boundaries. They don't have principles. They don't know what their alignment is. The reason why I say no to the jab, it's not to be macho. I don't post stuff on social media to be Mr. Macho. It's got nothing to do with that. It's because it's out of alignment with me. It's because it's incongruent, and it's out of integrity if I go along with this manipulative agenda. And I think if people found where that center point is with them, maybe for some people, they think it's fine. Okay, cool. Go do your thing. I honor that. That's cool. You do your thing. But don't come crying on my shoulder when you find out that that was the wrong decision, because I already gave you the heads up. That gets to be your wisdom now.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, we're getting tested on a level we haven't before. I'm coaching a whole group of people right now. A lot of them from Australia. They're going through their trials and tribulations in Sydney and Melbourne. And I say to them, I go, you're in the freaking dojo. Like, you could have come and joined my coaching 2 years ago and it wouldn't have the same impact as it does now, because now you're actually getting to implement it live in the flesh, second by second, real time. Like, it's not like, oh, I learned this thing and then I'll go and apply it when a challenge shows up. I'm like, you're in the midst of a challenge. Use it to build and implement and integrate straight away. It's a gift.
Definitely, it is a gift, man, and it's
got me fired up, guys.
I love it, man. I'm just
love it,
kicking
man.
back here, like listening right now. We drop a few questions and let you do your thing, man. I'm fired up too, man. I'm fired up. Like, this is what it's about, man. It's about doing the work, doing the inner work, and getting into that center place where it's like what you said. That's just not congruent with me. I'm living my life. I'm a sovereign man. I'm a sovereign human being. You can make whatever choices you want to make, but I'm not making that similar choice. You know, and you mentioned God earlier. Is like, for so long they've been trying to disconnect people from God, from a deep sense of spirituality and connection with the divine. Because again, if God isn't there, the state, the government becomes the new God. You know, and then people look to that for the answers, as opposed to something deep within and a deep connection with their creator, like you said.
Yeah, man.
Whatever you want.
And I mean, at the end of the day, the internal compromises that we've made within ourselves are going to be equivalent to the external compromises that we make, because what they're playing on is the fact that you aren't in integrity with yourself, that you haven't slayed your own inner demons, right? And the kind of person that's going to believe Klaus Schwab and trust these establishments and these books and this state is the person that doesn't trust themselves. And because they doesn't trust themselves, they have to have someone else tell them what's moral. They have to have someone tell them what they should value, because they don't know what they value within themselves. So all of a sudden now we're standing up for what anyone tells us is right, be it, you know what I mean, climate change, climate crisis, because we've got nothing good that we've seen within ourselves to represent. We have to represent the pseudo good, the pseudo value, the pseudo morality that's handed to us. And this is why I'm such a big proponent of the inner work, because it allows you to be censored. It puts you in a position where you're less able to be hypnotized by, you know what I mean, all these tyrants that are trying to dictate to you what it is to be you, what it is to be human, what it is to be inherently divine and good, and this, whatever this experience is. And you said it before, we're never stagnant. We're not stagnant beings. We are a continual unfoldment. We're a constant ongoing process, and we're constantly learning through all of this.
Yeah.
So it's time to learn how to surf, because there's big waves right now, man. And we're not sitting there waiting anymore. We're fucking on the wave. So what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. And the thing is too, man, these, you know, our social engineers, these architects of control, again, you know, they understand human psychology to a degree beyond, you know. That's why we have to know ourselves on the deepest levels, because psychopaths, sociopaths, etc., they co-opt your virtue and use it against you.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, I want to be a good person. You know, like, I care about my fellow man. I don't want your grandmother to die, or whatever the case may be. But it's like they use that against you. They co-opt it and they use it against you to follow these agendas that don't really make any rational sense. But anyways, man, I if you want anything to add, but I think this is a good place to end part one. But if you want to add something, man, go ahead.
No, I think you've hit on some really good points. I think that if we can get ahead of the curve, because you got to remember, these guys have planned this, whoever these guys are, it could be a conglomerate of like 6,000 people across the board. And I don't necessarily think it's just like 3 people at the top and they're all just doing, you know, like, let's do this, ha ha ha, Mr. Burns and Smithers and, like, you know, somebody else, you know. I don't think it's like that. But I definitely do think that some people in some foundations and organizations get their jollies off dominating and owning more of the land. You know, that old saying is, whoever owns the most land rules the kingdom. And you have established powers that have been around from, you know, thousands of years ago. You guys already know one of them, which would be Rome. You know, Rome never went away. It never disappeared. Rome's still in power. Like, Rome pulls strings right at the top. Like, you guys think it's Bill Gates. He's got nothing on Rome. Yeah. The Vatican, the papacy, the power that's in there, they pull the 300 and something 60 something trillion dollars they hold. Like Rothschilds and Rockefellers are like little, like,
Yeah, these are
little
puppets, man.
little foot soldiers compared to them. You know what I mean? So we got to look at the bigger picture from a prophetic standpoint. When I look at the scriptures, I study a lot of the eschatology, which is a, you know, last days, end times prophecy. And it's interesting, actually. John, the Revelator, who wrote Revelation, he was on the island of Patmos as well, which is out there near, you know, in Greece. So, so yeah, he brought this incredible revelation that Christ had given him, and when you look at it unfolding, you know, people refer a lot to like, oh, mark of the beast. You know, if you receive the mark of the beast, you won't be able to buy or sell unless you get the mark and all this. You know, so people hear all this and they're like, oh, maybe some prophecy is coming true. And I'm gonna tell you, 88% of biblical prophecy has already happened over the last 6,000 years, close to 6,000 years. And so when you see what it has in Revelation, it starts to get really interesting, because it's still the same theme as everything that's been going on for the last 4,000 that we know, 3,500 that we know. Because you look at the empires of Babylon, you know, Babylon was very much about idol worship. You know, it was very much pagan, very much about, you know, having their own identity as an empire to rule over the world. And then, you know, Daniel has this prophecy that only he was able to share. They had mystics and wizards and all sorts of people that came to the king Nebuchadnezzar to try and tell this prophecy, and they couldn't. And he killed them. It's like, if you couldn't work out what the dream was about, he'd kill you off. And then here comes Daniel, who stands before him and says, when you would typically say, long live the king to a king, if you said anything else, it would be like beheaded, right, for this behavior. He stands before the king and says, I saw the dream, and here's what God sent me to share with you, is that there will be a lesser empire that will come and destroy your empire and take over and become the established empire in this world. And like, to tell a king that is a big no-no, but he did, but because it was in alignment with what he was called to do in his mission. And, you know, he went through his experiences, as you see, you know, challenged. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were challenged to stand before the statue, and they wouldn't bow down. So they were sent to the fire. When they were in the fire, they were protected. It's the same thing that's happening to us right now. We're being told to bow down to this beast system. In Babylon, Babylon means Babel. Babel is confusion. We're being brought into confusion right now, and we're told to worship a system. You going and agreeing to it over and over again. Like, people want to know what the mark of the beast is. There may be some digital print. There may be, you know, a shot that has a fluorescent, they call it luciferase, fluorescent type chemicals in it that they can track. It could be that comes into implementation, but that's not actually the mark of the beast that Christ warns us about. What he warns us about is he's concerned about our soul. It goes deeper than the surface. It's not a print on the hand or a scratch on here. It's what you worship in your mind. That's the forehead. And what you agree to with your hand is coming into alliance with the system. And what we have before us is the beast system. There's a precursor that's being set up right now. It's the early stages of this beast system to try and establish some form of power. It's done it throughout history, from Babylon to Medo-Persia, when Medo-Persia was then destroyed by the Greeks. The Greeks then were taken over by the Romans. This tiny little village in Italy that blew up and freaking took over damn near most of the world. And we see this playing through. We're still in the days now. We're in the last days. We're in the days of divided nations where it will never come together. There won't be a one world government. No matter how much they push for it, God says there won't be, that it won't be fully established for full control. It won't get there, right? And so we see this, trying this attempt. And the enemy of our soul is always trying to speed up or slow down God's plan. And he's never been able to do it. You know, so that I hold on to this faith that as much as there may be times of darkness, there may be times of struggle, and it feels like there's doubt, there's also good that rises with it too. There's a revival, there's an awakening that happens as well. And we may have to be prepared to be in a split society, a splintered society for a little while this thing plays out. Yeah. We just don't know everything yet. But what we do know is we get to choose where we live emotionally each and every day, and where we live spiritually, and who we're committed to, and what system we decide to be in alliance with or not.
Mic drop right there, man. Guys, thank you so much for listening to the first half of this episode with Joel Brown, dropping the wisdom. I'm loving this conversation, loving where it's going. On the second side, for our members, if you want to jump on, Joel's going to teach us how to make $5 million in the 2.5 weeks. So please subscribe to our Patreon community. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care.
All right, cool. We'll catch you on this side. All right, to our members, welcome back. We're here with Joel Brown. This is dropping some wisdom in part 1. Joel, you talked a little bit about the potential of us being in this split society as things kind of unfold. And so I'm just curious to see what you think that split society is going to look like.
Yeah, man. I think just to like future cast this and see what's happening, we can go based off what we've seen happen in the past. We can even go back in history and see what happened at times like, Nazi Germany, French Revolution, when the Black Plague kicked in. You can even look even further back at the dominance of Rome over empires and the fractures that were happening then. Not much changes even now. Like when you look at it, it's still empire trying to take hold. Every other empire that was before, when you look at the great empires such as Babylon, you look at Medo Persia, then you look at Greece, and you look at Rome. Every other empire before Rome came in was very much like this. They were in this passive war towards God. They weren't really going for God's people as such. They were all more about power. But what's happening now is we moved into Rome, we started to see this waging a war more directly on God. And it was only after Christ was crucified and resurrected and brought the eternal promise. It was like a new covenant, right? And this new promise to us of the eternal. And we see this, and what happens is you start to see this like religioso type power that takes hold and uses church and state power for control. We never had that with Rome. Rome ruled with an iron fist when it came to wars, right? And conquering land, but it started to become more of a direct spiritual attack. And we're still seeing it today. It's like this whole, we keep hearing these words, holy war. It's like a holy war, right? When we say, the Middle East came in and attacked America. Well, it's a holy war, right? When you see the persecution of believers, you have this Catholic means universal, right? And by the way, I'm not slamming anybody that subscribes to that as their belief. It's the system that I'm actually addressing here. It gets dangerous when you have church and state power come together. When people ask me, Joe, are you religious? No, I'm not. Matter of fact, I have the biggest issue with religion, and I have the most frustrating talks with Christians. And I'm a believer of Christ. And it's because legalities and the church institution gets in the way. And you're going to see this. This is my, I guess, in a way, like a preview of what's to come in time. It may not happen in our lifetime. We don't know yet what the time scale is. But as we see this, like more of a leftist type, liberal, very old democratic type thing flowing out right now, it'll get to a point where people get over that. It's like, it's not working very well. It's chaotic. We don't like this. So what then comes in is this pendulum swing. And it happens all the time. There's been a vacuum that's created because of the pandemic. And then there's this, we need this to come in. So it becomes this leftist, like, let's get Biden in. Let's select him, not even elect him, because they cheated to get in. I'm 100% on that. Like, I don't care what anyone thinks. We see it. And then the puppet masters come in and start pulling the strings. And so people get so sick of that because it's too chaotic and it's unstable that they are crying out for something else. That something else is a very extreme right wing conservative arm swings in. And the issue that we have at hand at stake, whether it's in our lifetime or not, is this conservative, religioso political type power that comes together. Some people that are experiencing what's going on with this, more of this left, godless, everything leads with science. So you can manipulate science if you want. I think it's a great vehicle. It just doesn't have compassion in it. This eugenicist type like mindset that's going to go on. People won't want that after a while. It's too destructive. So they'll want the other, but the other's too extreme as well. So when we look at this, it ends up being this almost like this direct battle that starts to come into play more and more. It becomes more and more evident that it's not just a battle of flesh and blood. It's principalities and power that's in play. It's good versus evil. You guys are getting previews of it right now. Like, how is this? The vaccines, the shots have graphene oxide in every single shot. We've seen it studied under vials. Dr. Robert Young, a number of universities have done these studies now. They found it in Japan and they've had to cancel millions of vials. They're doing this and they're randomizing it. So some people that are getting the shot, they don't know whether they're getting a phase 1, a phase 2, or phase 3. Phase 1 is like 80% saline and 20% heavy metals. The second phase 2 is like 40% saline and 60% metals. And the phase 3 is like 20% saline and 80% metals. You don't know which one you're getting. It's like playing Russian roulette. And I get these people that message me all the time. Oh, I had 2 shots. I'm fine. It's like, yeah, cool. You're probably lucky you got phase 1. But if somebody else comes along because they thought that you were good and they get phase 3 or double of phase 3, they're done. Right? So this is an evil Russian roulette game, and it's been established by those in the establishment that have decided to pair with these pharmaceutical companies, big pharma, and these corporations, and these governments are invested. They lobby. Like, you see the connections they have. It's insane to see how they're all making their money off this, and they're draining it from society, and they're also depopulating society, and they keep covering it up, right? So we see this come into play. And there's definitely, you can't deny that something in your spirit and your soul doesn't feel right. There's a darkness that's looming. And when we put heavy metals like graphene oxide, if you guys actually understand what graphene is stronger than steel. It is flexible and it's light. Like, it's incredible material. Some people still can't even get their head around it. It's nuts. But what I do know about it is it oxidizes the red blood cells. And they've shown images of this. I've had Dr. Young show what happens. It crystallizes the red blood cells to the point where if you have crystallized blood cells going into your brain, it creates neurological disorders. I'm talking like early 20s, mid 20s, early 30s coming in with Alzheimer's and dementia already. Like, that's not good. I know what word you guys are in, but that's not good from where I'm from, right? And then, you have lack of oxygen going to the heart. Someone gets a shot and then, a month later going for a run and they collapse. Oh, why did they collapse? Well, it must be CV19, right? They can throw that into anything. You could fart and someone said it's a COVID-like symptom. It's ridiculous what they're doing now, So we're being played. And what I do know is that God doesn't act like that. That's not his behavior. God's behavior, if you want to know, like, when you look at the model of Christ, right? Whether you believe in it or not, let's just look at him as a model, as a figure. What he stood for, if you see the theme of how he expressed his character in the scriptures, truth, love, and liberty. He stood for all of those 3 things. And he did it consistently. And he kept calling us to those standards. He's like, come into this walk. He called it the way. As a matter of fact, he didn't even call them Christians, the followers. The Romans called them Christians, little Christ. He just said, this is the way. And so when we look at this, it's like, well, if I live my life in truth, love, and liberty, would I easily be able to discern then when anything's outside of those brackets? Probably so. And I'm not saying you have to be that to discern it. I think that there's something in your heart and a wanting to be in your truth, love, and liberty that brings you to greater discernment. And so if we see that there's this evil that's in play now, we understand that it's this waging war spiritually on God, but using humanity to get to him, right? The enemy of our soul is pissed. He doesn't like us because we have the promise of the eternal. We have the option with free will to choose to come into that grace with God, right? We have the opportunity to stand in truth, love, and liberty. We have all that. We're more free than you think. The cards are so heavily stacked in our favor, it's ridiculous. And so the societal programs and the structures are trying to consistently keep us in, like, the matrix, if you want to call it that, in this dark fallen kingdom to acquire your soul. And when you look at the effects of graphene oxide, it's sucking the oxygen out. It's directly attacking God's original design that's in your system. The mRNA is altering your DNA. It's altering your genes. Right? The aluminum oxide is oxidizing your blood. Your blood, if it's acidic, is going to be way more affected. Our job is to alkaline, come back to nature. God's already given us everything, the greens, the chlorophyll, the avocado, the lemon and the lime water, the watermelon, like all those things are high pH. They alkaline our system so we're less affected by this oxidation. It's already in nature. Man comes along that's godless and chooses to work with an evil influence, sometimes not even knowing that they're under evil influence because they're so far away from their choice of God that they start acting out in a greedy, selfish manner. And if you see the guys that are trying to run it right now, look at them. They're godless. They believe in eugenics. They are about their money and about their fame and about their power and control. God doesn't express those values. He doesn't need to express those values, right? And he's calling us into centeredness. The more we come into the centeredness of truth, love, and liberty, we start to notice this is out of alignment. And so this is why I have a problem with a lot of even believers, and I'm calling believers out right now. Like I got pastors that telling their congregation, you can't come to church unless you have the shot. And I'm like, are you out of your freaking mind? Like, what a waste of the last 30 years or 40 years of your supposedly being in relationship with God when you're calling your people to have to go and get something that's going to put darkness in their system.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a lot of misleading that's happening right now. And I think people need to lovingly get their ass kicked because they're not stepping.
You know, I feel like it's like spirituality on paper, but not in practice, you know, and I mean, experiencing the same thing, you know, I work in the health, alternative health world as a practitioner of the healing arts. And like, we have chiropractors and Chinese medicine doctors that are sending out newsletters to their clients, telling them to get the jab. And so who they are, they're, you know, educators, you know, they're practitioners of these ancient arts, and yet they're falling for the propaganda, you know, they're falling for the fear. And so it's like, people ask me, well, how could they be doing this? It's like, well, there's one thing to be to really feel it in your heart and to really know it, and versus just, oh, I have a letter after my name, or I've had certain types of training. So it's completely different. So it doesn't surprise me that there's religious people out there, you know, that are doing the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, look, when people ask me if I'm religious, I say no, I'm in relationship with God. That's what everything that Christ even told us anyways, is that he's like, come into relationship. It's so different because it's not an institution. We can't hang it up on man. It's like a man told you to do this. It's like, that's like, I'd rather go to God. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'd rather have my spiritual connection and my seeking to understand with that wisdom, the creator wisdom, not some man that's, you know, this man who tells you whatever could have layers of trauma and they're overcompensating and it could be all ego and you're like, oh, that's truth.
Yep.
You know, so yeah, I think this whole cancel culture thing that you guys hit on the first part of this interview is a form of just silencing people from having a voice. And when I look at someone like Christ, he stood in the face of the religious, he stood in front of the Pharisees and he says, you are like whitewashed tombs. It was like one of the most disrespectful things you could say in that time, because it's saying you look good on the outside, but you're dead on the inside. Whitewashed tombs, right? And this is what's happening is you got so many people that are like whitewashed tombs, look good on the outside, branding and saying all the things. They're doing what's popular. Christ never was concerned with popular. He spoke for truth. And that's what you guys are doing. When you share what you share and you're speaking up, you guys are sharing truth. And I honor that. I respect that. I see that you guys, that's why I jumped on this podcast. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. You guys are about it. And, you know, we can get the truth and the liberty down. Liberty is freedom. It's like, we'll fight for that. We'll go, the thing that we get to master, which is a constant practice for me, and it's one of the toughest, is love. Remember I said truth, love, and liberty? Love is tough, man. It's tough. And it's not going to naturally come from us if we keep hanging ourselves up on institutions and keep hanging ourselves up on having to rely on systems, because we'll get pulled and swayed which way, wherever. Like I want to find my love in my creator who taught me love from the beginning of time, you know? And so that's where we get to come from. And it's tough because I used to call at the start of this pandemic, I kicked off like 20 months back. I was going for it. Like I already saw it, you know, and I lost so many followers at the start, like over 10,000 something followers I would have lost in the first like 3 months of speaking up, because people were like, Joel, you're insensitive, you know? And to be honest, I was calling people sheep too. You know, I wasn't like directly like raising my voice and tone to attack at people. I wasn't doing that. I was posting some things here and there that alluded to, you know, sheep and lion. And I just made it a commitment. I said, I'm not going to call people sheep anymore, because I don't want to be that guy that people, after they've made their decision, feels like they can't come back and have that conversation with me. Like now I have people left, right, and center that come to me every day without a doubt. Like probably even right now, I got flooded inbox. Hey, Joel, do you have a detox protocol to get this vaccine out? Like people are in need. I had a woman reach out to me, suicidal. She's feeling suicidal. And I asked her, what's going on? Like, give it to me. She's like, I didn't know where else to go. I saw that you were sharing detox protocols that you work with. I've been working with doctors and getting these like protocol. We've been tweaking. It's amazing. And my doctor here in Bali she's been able to detox hundreds and hundreds of people from the shots. Now you've got to be detoxing for the rest of your life, by the way, because you keep it management because it's doing damage. It's doing permanent damage in people and it's lodging into organs and fatty tissues. It's nuts. But I had this conversation with this woman. She's in New York City, and she said to me, this symptoms that she's experiencing after having the shot 3 weeks ago, her second one, she said, it feels like the room's spinning. And she said, when I lay down, my throat feels like it's closing over. And she says, I feel darkness and heaviness over me all the time now. And she says, I feel like I'm disconnected from myself. Something's going on. Yeah. Something's going on from this shot. You know what I mean? And this isn't the first time I heard it. I've heard it from many people now that they feel like they've lost their identity. Something's happened within them. There's an attack on the God gene that's in the body. It's been designed to do this. And so this becomes
100 years ago, man. 100 years ago, Rudolf Steiner said there will be a vaccine to cast the spirit out from man. Like it's insane, dude.
Bro. It's nuts. It's not.
And what the scariest part is that we just don't even know the extent of it yet. This is just the beginning, man. It's so early. And yeah, dude, it's freaky. I'd love to know like a bit more in your experience. Like what are people really experiencing from the shot? Can you go a bit deeper on that?
Yeah, so I'm not a doctor, so I'm just going to preface that. That's important to know. But I've been speaking with a lot of doctors, and I've been looking at blood cell analysis with them. I've been interviewing them. They've been presenting evidence, visual evidence. Like you get to a point where you see it, you can't unsee it anymore. And it's this consistent visual evidence that keeps showing up with everyone that keeps getting these shots. And like I shared, there's heavy metal particles. They're even putting graphene oxide in the flu shot. So people that had a flu shot like a year or two ago, they've got graphene oxide in their system. My doctor that's working out here in Indonesia, she said to me, she said, Joel, I've been doing blood cell analysis, which is when you put the blood under a microscope and you can have a look, right? And Dr. Young has like $1 million lab equipment for electron microscopy. You can look even deeper into cells and see what's actually happening and take footage of it. And they both have said that, like Dr. Young has been operating for like 40 something years in his medical field. He's one of the lead scientists and naturopaths in the world. He's cured tens of thousands of people from cancer. This guy knows what he's doing. And Big Pharma hates him. They've tried to throw him under the bus a couple of times, tried to sue him. He pleaded not guilty. They try to hang him on anything they can. They can't stop him, because he's speaking truth and he's out there doing his thing. My doctor here in Indonesia has been doing her work for 24 years. And she said, Joe, over the last 24 years, I've been looking under a microscope at blood and work with tens of thousands. She said, only in the last 15 to 16 months have I started to see graphene oxide in the blood. Mostly in those that are vaccinated, a little bit in those that haven't been vaxxed yet. So the question is, well, like, where's that little bit coming from, right? Because this is the thing that people get really stuck on. It's going to sound sci-fi, guys. You ready for this? It's going to sound a little sci-fi-ish.
We're ready, bro.
Yeah. You'd have to hear the interview with Dr. Young that I did. You can check it out in my Telegram group. Just go to Agents of Change is the name of the group, but just type in, like t.me/change agents. That's the Telegram group. And you see it there. And I've got 2 parts. We had to put it on Rumble because it was going to get deleted off everything else. But he shows this visual evidence and he says, what happens is we have chemtrails, and they keep saying it's conspiracy. You can't keep calling everything conspiracy when it consistently keeps showing up. Like, it's kind of like when I see people smoking and I'm like, can I see it? And I'm like, that used to happen in the 1990s. Are people still doing that now? Like when people call people conspiracy theories, I'm like, do people still call people that now? There's been way too many conspiracy theories come true, right? Some conspiracy theories are pretty wacky, so I get it. But most are actually coming true, which is nuts. But we look at these chemtrails, and they've put cups out in the open where there's chemtrailing happening. And chemtrails is the planes are flying overhead and they dump out poisonous clouds and fumes behind them. And as you see, these heavy metal particles, or you have barium, you have aluminum oxide, you have now graphene oxide, which they never used to dump, but they're dumping it now. And you have a number of other ones too. I won't bore you with what they are. But all of these metals are poisonous. There's even arsenic in some that they've found from the chemtrail. And they lead to upper respiratory issues. Now, the news and media is starting to they're trying to normalize it like it's a normal fun thing that's happening in the world. And they did it in Australia recently. Sydney and Melbourne were copying it. They had up and down on the coast. They were dumping chemtrails nonstop. They were doing like zigzags and cross patterns in the sky. I've got video evidence of this. Contrails, which is just condensation trails, are just like a thin line, and it disappears very quickly after the plane's taken off. Like you see it for a little bit and then it just disappears. Chemtrails stay in the sky and they get fluffy like clouds and they come lower to the atmosphere. And then you probably notice, like I noticed when it was happening here in Bali, when I got sick, I got like a COVID-like symptoms and thought I had CV-19. I was like, oh, I thought this thing wasn't legit, but now I feel that it was my symptoms reaction to the atmosphere when they were doing chemtrailing. And I walked down to the beach with my dogs and I see the car park where it was next to the beach, where it's usually nice and clear, it was all foggy. And on the windows was all like sticky surface. And on my motorbike seat, my black motorbike seat, there's all these little like white ash particles. Only on the days they do chemtrailing. So you guys think this stuff doesn't affect you? It does. We breathe in this crap, right? So you get these upper respiratory issues that start to come into play. People freak out and go, I've got COVID. They go and get tested on a shitty little stick called a PCR, which has graphene oxide on the swab test. And then they wear their face nappies, their masks, which has graphene oxide here. So what we're doing is we're not only getting graphene oxide in our system, we're also covering our mouth and our nose and breathing back in carbon dioxide. See how this is a massive oxide intoxication that's happening right now in the world? And they're found in San Pellegrino water bottles. They've actually put a magnet here and they're able to run it up and down, and there's particles that will come up and down on the side of the bottle when they add an ingredient in to measure to break up the particles. You have another, like a normal water bottle, and that wasn't happening. They've found graphene oxide particles in San Pellegrino water bottles, and people
are drinking
this, man. Yeah, it's nuts, man. It's nuts. They've found it. They've done it multiple times and shown it's not just come from one source. This is something you guys got to understand. Is like these things I'm sharing with you is not just from one doctor. It's not just from one university. It's very important to know that it's coming from many sources and it's amplifying like crazy. There's way more doctors now, because the thing is, like Dr. Young, he has $1 million lab equipment. A lot of other, like your normal GP doesn't look for this stuff. They're just told from the higher ups, you've got to get everyone the vaccine. And then they've thought like, well, over my last 30, 40 years in medicine, vaccines have been pretty fine. So they're just relating it to what they've experienced. I get that. I get why they're administering it. But this one's different. It's not a vaccine. It's an experimental lethal injection that it will slowly kill us. It's like, think about this, guys. It's like a slow release grenade going off in the body and shrapnel pieces flying around in the body. Parasites that are in the body that are leaching off your God-given cells, and it's altering your DNA. It's like, why would you want this in your system?
Yeah, I don't want it, dude. Fuck that shit.
It's a death
for a
wish.
long
It's
time.
an absolute death wish, man. So when I get haters that come at me, oh, I've taken it, well, they say you're crazy. Some guy said to me, because I shot in an Instagram live, and I went like this to my arm. I was pointing to my arm, like if you get the shot. And I'm saying it because some people, when they hear the shot, they're just still not engaged to what is going. So they're like, I'm use gestures and hammer. I've had 2 people so far say, oh, this is cult-like behavior, or like you're trying to program people into your belief. I get all sorts of like people saying stuff. And I've got to a point where I will see that and I'll think to myself, man, I feel so sorry for that person. Like I legit do feel sorry. I feel compassion because that person is laughing at this now. They think it's a joke. They think we're a joke, but they're coming into a rude awakening very soon. Everyone's immune system is different. People have different detox processes. Everyone's pH levels, whether they're more alkaline or acidic, are all different. Some people have comorbidity. So like everyone's experiencing different things. Also, when they randomize the phases of the shots, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, you don't know what you're getting. You better hope you don't get a phase 3 on first and second go. Like, you know what I mean? So we don't know. But what we do see is what's happening. Dr. Ryan Cole, he's a pathologist in Ohio, and he said that he's been in the game for like 20 something years. And he said, for the first time in 20 years, he said, I've seen a 20x increase of cancer patients coming through now. And it's connected to the shots. Most of them have had the shot. You know, there's going to be massive impact on people that have taken the shot now. And you can't get some of this stuff out of your system. Even if you go through the detox protocols, not every single bit of it comes out. Dr. Young said that what your body does to protect you is sometimes if it can't flush something, it sends it to the fatty tissues. Guess where your fatty tissues are? In your brain. Mm-hmm. So it's lodging metal particles in your brain. You know, and 80% of a lot of these metals, if you have a look at what the mRNA does, it's crazy. It has sequence programming, and it's guiding and directing these magnetic particles to go to organs in the body. Do you know how nuts that is? Like they can literally send it to the reproductive organs. They found that almost 80%, depending on the person and the whatever, the volume, up to 80% goes to the reproductive organs. That leads to, what do you think that leads to, guys?
Infertility.
Yeah. Sterilization, right?
Yeah.
Infertility. So like I'm thinking to myself, and this is prophetic, man. God warns, Christ warns, he warned. He said in last days, he says, mothers and fathers will turn on sons and daughters will turn on mothers and fathers. And I was like, that's kind of crazy. And it says there'll be days of lawlessness. We're looking at the law right now, and the laws don't mean crap. It's like rules have come in and overtaken laws. It's weird, right? It's like you can always break rules, but not laws. Now they're just mandating rules all the time. And when I thought about like the family unit getting broken down, and Joel, I know you got kids too, right?
Yeah, bro.
You got kids. It's like, imagine your family unit breaking down. You become weak in your mindset and in your soul, in your spirit. Yeah. As a man, you're a leader of the family. You're like the holding it together, provider and protector. But imagine you've gone and told your kids, you got to get this shot. You got to get this shot. You got to get it. You know, it's the right thing to do for the greater good, as they keep using as a manipulative tool. And then the kids go and get the shot. 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, or whatever it is, when they're old enough, they turn around and go, I can't have kids now because you told me to get the shot. Like, imagine how much this would separate and divide families in the coming time, in the next decade or more. Yeah. Like, it's just going to be nuts.
I know parents who have gaslighted their kids into getting the shot. Yeah. I know kids that, I say kids, but I'm talking about adults that didn't want to get the shot, and parents have literally been able to coerce them into getting the shot. It's crazy.
Vice versa too. You know, you have these young teenagers or young millennials, you know, that are super woke, and they're shaming their elderly parents into getting the jab.
Yeah.
You know, as well. So it's happening in both ways. So not only is it going to happen in the future when they come back and go, hey, like I'm 28, 30, 35 years old and I can't have children, but it's happening right now. You know, so, you know, this dissolution of the family unit is happening. It's continuing, and it's sad to see. And a lot of these people also too, you have to understand, is that people can't even make connections between they just got the shot a month ago and got sick. You think 5, 10, 15 years from now, these people are going to be like, well, it's because I got the shot. You know, they're going to be so entrenched in the system, on meds. You know, they got the hook from Big Pharma. It's just going to be the continuous thing that we see right now. You know, now there'll be those that might connect the dots. But generally speaking, people just like, I'm sick. I have this thing. I don't know why. And they won't make the connection to a thing they literally got jabbed inside of them. That was an experimental thing that they had no clue what was in it, with no long-term studies.
Yeah, I think the only way that we probably have and I hate we're even having to think about this. It sucks. Like, it sucks that that's where we're at. It's just, but this is what it is. It's the reality. I think the only way that will become super apparent is if the system had a pendulum swing shift and somebody came in and there was mass exposure of what's actually been happening. Because that could happen in a case too. It could start to take more of a lean in another direction, and there could be massive exposure to break down the trust in the system too, which would, if they want to send it in a different direction, right? And if that happened, then it would become apparent, where it's like calling out the media. There's always going to be people sharing truth. which is what I love, is the fact that we, you know, and you get to choose whether you're going to be that person or not. I think it's important that more people do. I'd hope that when they listen to this, they'll share the truth even more. Like, just think, if you're listening, you've like discovered something, you're like, that's crazy, that's messed up, this needs to get out there, share it.
Yeah.
Some of you are scared to get bullied, scared to get ridiculed. Well, the weight of regret of not sharing is far heavier than somebody disagreeing with you. I'm gonna tell you that, you know. So yeah, it'll come out in ways and shapes, and some people will live the rest of their life in denial and pretend like something hasn't happened too. You're right. Like, I know somebody that had the shot. 2 weeks later, all the symptoms of someone that has a shot. And I'm like, did you take the shot? Yeah, but it's not that. I was like, okay, so you're 32 years old. For the 32 years of your life, have you ever experienced the symptoms that you just have now? No. Oh, what do you think the coincidence is? Like, where do you think you might have got it from? What do you think it, but they're so in their denial because they don't want to, it hurts them so much to think that they made the wrong decision.
Yeah.
And it reinforces this feeling in people as, I'm not smart enough. I get it. Like, I get why people want to avoid it, but this is why the pre-work, the self-development work is so important. The spiritual work is so important beforehand, so that people can own their stuff. It goes back to ownership once again.
Yeah. I've had friends and clients who who are younger, who experienced some weird health issue. And, you know, I slowly come in, well, have you had any, you know, medical interventions lately? Oh, have you gotten a flu shot? Oh yeah, I got a flu shot, like, you know, every year, or I got it 4 months ago. And it's like, well, and then they, I mean, no. It's like, no, it's not that. It's not that. Okay. You know, what do you,
Yeah, someone just won't make the link, you know? Yeah, I think we're in a really important time in history. I was sharing on my social because some people were reaching out to me like, Joel, you know, what do you think about these people in the self-development space that aren't speaking up? And I say, well, look, I feel called to do it. I don't know if they do. Maybe they don't. Maybe it's not feeling like it's their mission. But what I do know is people aren't looking for popular anymore. When they're trying to work things out, they want truth. It's so important because they want certainty. Like, what is it? What's actually happening here? Can we work this thing out? Let's piece it together. And we've lived in a society for so long where I look at some of these self-development guys and all they do is just keep copying the same formula. If they see somebody post something that did pretty well, they're going to go and repost the same thing because it gets lots of likes. It's like, I'm so over that game. I couldn't give two craps about that. You know, it's like, I'd rather get the things off my chest and connect with people that are actually feeling something, because some people have told me, oh, I've stopped following this person because I feel like they don't get me anymore. I feel like they're pretending like nothing is happening and they're still flaunting their luxurious cars or their whatever it is that they're doing and not connect. Like, I don't feel seen, heard, or understood anymore. So that's a loss for that person, whether they know it or not, because now they're not considered a leader, and less people will come to them for that support, and less people will get support from them because they're just trying to play the game of Mr. Popular or Mrs. Popular. So, you know, we're in an important time in history, and I challenge my followers, you know, I'm like, yo, are you going to look back at this and say, like, I really freaking stood my ground? Like, this is a time where I did what I said I was going to do. Or are you going to say that, nah, yeah, kind of like let other people work this one out and I played it safe? You got to live with
for a
that.
lot of people, man. It's super uncomfortable for a lot of people, particularly people who have like built their life to be a certain way, and to, you mean, play out their 10-year plan, as we mentioned, or whatever it is. Now all of a sudden there's this glaring blind spot which they refuse to look at because it interrupts exactly what they've envisioned for themselves. I mean, how their ego presents on social media, everything they've built around themselves, and so they're refusing to go there, you know. And it's a damn shame. I mean, how many spiritual gurus and whatnot, and you mean celebrities have we seen endorse this thing? And it's fucking sickening, to be honest with you. And this is where I implore everybody to take responsibility for your own life, take responsibility for your own health. The age of idols is fucking finished. It's over, man.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. I felt that, man. Hollywood's dead. I mean, it was already dying, but it's dead. Like, it's legit dead. Unfortunately, people are moving to models like Netflix, which is still under that agenda rule. You know, like, we talk about the map of consciousness, you know, these brackets. Have you guys ever seen that? The map of consciousness?
I think I might know what you're referencing. Yeah.
I'll pull it up on a share screen if you want to make me a co-host.
Sure, bro.
I'll show you, because it's really important, right? Like a lot of what we're experiencing right now, if we haven't healed and haven't moved to forgiveness and understanding and acceptance, what we tend to do is we tend to stay in force. So if you have a look at this here,
David Hawkins,
yeah. So in the upper brackets, neutrality to enlightenment, and then underneath it is courage down to shame. A lot of the coaching I do is around shame and guilt, and apathy, like feeling hopeless. And this is where a lot of people are right now. The fear and the propaganda is keeping them down in the lower brackets. They're feeling anxiety. It's frightening. That's the view of life. They feel disappointed because they want desire. So they're like, this is what I work with those with addictions. It's like they want to, go out and hook up with everybody. They get hooked on alcohol. They take drugs. It always ends up disappointing at the end of it because it's never fully filling their cup. So I aim for a harmony. It's like bring them up into brackets of forgiveness, acceptance, trust, understanding, reverence, love, joy, peace. These are all the things that Christ kept representing when he was in mission. Was like, we get to come into these brackets now. Like, don't wait. He refers to it as the kingdom of God. He's like, come into the kingdom. Whereas what we have is we have empire trying to take us down to force. God's calling us into the kingdom of power and the kingdom of love and the kingdom of truth and the kingdom of liberty, which is the higher brackets. So yeah, I just see what's going on, and I see that those that operate a lot from like pride, it looks like they've got their stuff together, or their courage, like they got to constantly keep using courage to try and like make a way. And this is where a lot of people that are in celebrity spaces tend to play up here. The question I ask is like, what happens when that thing that's feeding you no longer feeds you? What happens when that goes? Right? Like, do you lose your identity with that, or are you still intact? And most people that have been living in force, that have been trying to overcompensate or tie themselves to things. Like I work with entrepreneurs that are 7-figure entrepreneurs, and you think like they're crushing it. They make, multiple 7 figures a year. Maybe they have the private jets or the planes or the Rolls Royce or the fancy glitzy watch. They cry themselves to sleep at night. Some of them, they feel lonely. Like they're a mess when it comes to their family life. They're a disappointment to their children, and so I see that. I'm just like, they're not in power, they're in force still. Yeah. They just got really good at forcing, but it's exhausting. You become exhausted. You're always trying to be a perfectionist. You're always judging yourself and judging others. Like it's such an unfortunate place to be in. So this beast system is trying to keep us in the lower brackets, and God keeps calling us to be in the higher brackets, going, come up with me, co-create with me in power. So don't let the enemy of our soul take you down to that place. That's where you get captured into that space. And how important is our soul if good and evil is battling for it? Each and every one of us, you've been placed here for a reason. You have meaning that's been placed on your life. You've got purpose in your heart. It's there, and so many of us are trying ambition instead of purpose. We're ambition to be something, be someone. We got to get out of our own way and come into the grace of God and come into that co-creation. That's where the power is.
I think that's a perfect place to end. That was beautiful, brother.
100%, man. But before you go, I made a promise to my members on the other side that you'd explain to them how to make $5 million in 2.5 weeks. So
Robert Bank.
Yeah, there you go. Robert Bank. Invent a vaccine.
Well, you probably could have dropped $20K on a Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson, like, early 2019, you probably would have had your 5 million by now.
Yeah,
but
right.
is, like, I learned this from Gary Vaynerchuk many moons ago. He said to me, Joel, it's not about how much money you make, it's how you make your money that counts. And that resonated, man. It resonated. It's stuck with me ever since. And I think about that, because I could go into my back cave and make $1 million programs and launch them back to back. And my girlfriend probably wouldn't like it. I'd have not much of a life. It would just be me in the lab, in the cave. But that's not fulfilling to me, So I'd say, like, yeah, you get your money up, but if your money's not going to a greater purpose, you get to reevaluate that one and work that one out,
Yeah, man.
You might want a little bit of money to decentralize and create some new things in your life now. Like, that's what I'm doing. I'm getting some land out here in Bali with my girl, and out in a rice field near the ocean, and just getting on top of things, man. I made my health a huge priority. I'm detoxing, going on detox protocols to get heavy metals out, because I've taken vaxxers. I'm not anti-vax. I'm anti this one. but I've taken yellow fever and Hep B, Vax. I've taken a bunch of them, so they still have cobalt and aluminium oxide and a bunch of other stuff. You don't want that stuff in you, especially when you're around this. Yeah. If you're around your phone or you're around your Wi-Fi, you're around cell towers. I mean, Dr. Young broke this down. He's been studying EMF waves for 40 years, and he said he was one of the first dudes, if you saw on the news like 20 years ago, the guy that was like sharing like what happens to your brain when you hold the radio waves near you. And he did all the scans and everything. He's seen it all and been around it for 40 years. And he said to me, he said, Joel, these heavy metal particles, especially graphene oxide in the blood, they crank the 5G, you turn into a microwave. Like, I'm not trying to scare people. I'm saying, get this stuff out now.
Yeah.
Liposomal glutathione breaks down. It's one of the only things that can actually break down graphene oxide. It takes a while. It kind of rusts away at it and it eats it out and takes it down to dissolve it, to get it out of your system. But we've got to get this crap out of our system, guys. God never made us to have this stuff in our system. This is a direct attack on God's creation, so we've got to come back to nature. I know Yerasimos, I know that you're big on your natural health and alternative, listen to him, go to him for advice. He's got the goods. He knows how to bring you back into your harmony in your body. And that's where we're going to be at, in a time of chaos, come back into your harmony.
Bro, man, so appreciative of your time and your wisdom and the deep dives and the deep research that you've done, and for sharing it with us and for our audience. Such a pleasure to host you and have you and to be connected with you, and to meet fellow truth warriors on this path where we are all being forced to stand up. There's a beautiful silver lining to all of this. Anything that you want to leave our audience with before we bounce? Anything where they can find you, what you got coming up? Let them know.
Yeah, if you want to know more about the God stuff, not religion, relationship, we created my friend, he's been a theologian for 15 years. He's awesome. Like, he really knows how to speak in a culture, very well versed, very philosophical. He loves to talk about existentialism, and he goes deep and very profound stuff. This content we talk about, it transcends self-development. It's spiritual development. If you want to check that out, go to our podcast. It's called The Unknown God. Right, the unknown God. Paul the Apostle was speaking with the Greeks, which is really interesting. He's in, I think it was in Athens, and he had this conversation with them where he says, he had this incredible way of articulating and sharing the gospel, which is the good news of the kingdom, which is everything we talked about, to different cultures. And he found an awesome way to communicate it to the Greeks at the time that didn't understand. They had more of their pagan idols and they were kind of confused. And he says, he creates this mystery around it where he's like, oh, you don't know the unknown God? And they're like, what? Who's the unknown God? So it became this thing that really captured our attention when we're looking in scriptures. Like, that's actually cool, because a lot of people, I believe, don't really know God. Like, they don't know it in the way that he's been communicating to us, because religion has got in the way. So the subtitle to the podcast, The Unknown God, is a podcast podcast about God for people who don't like church.
Nice.
And that's what it is, and we have people of all walks of life that come and listen to it. It's so dope. We get so many questions and awesome answers that come from it and breakthroughs. So yeah, check that out. Also, new program out called Conquer the Matrix. So conquerthematrix.com. It's all about decentralizing your life, coming out of the system. We break down all the pillars, health, wealth. We go into mindset, emotion, spiritual as well. It's like $197 US. We're kicking it off pretty soon, actually, November. So whenever this comes out, hopefully you get to hear it before then. Go to conquerthematrix.com and jump in. And thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate you.
Yeah, brother. Thank you, man.
Appreciate you too, man. And our members and our listeners, the people that support us, we appreciate you guys too. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. Peace.
Ciao.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time, they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean.